Support for this episode comes from Signature Bank.
Hi, this is Gary Head, Chairman and CEO of Signature Bank of Arkansas. Our bank was founded in Northwest Arkansas in May of 2005, and in 19 years we have grown to over $1.1 billion in assets and 210 teammates to serve you. We have locations in Bentonville, Springdale, Rogers, Fayetteville, Harrison, Jonesboro, and Brinkley. We have a 100% Latino Hispanic bank in downtown Rogers we call Banco C. We're opening our second Banco C early this summer in downtown Springdale on Emma Street. We have a talented group of bankers that love the communities that we serve. All of our bankers have the authority to do business and are eager to do so. As chairman, I welcome your call at 479-684-3700 or visit us online at signature.bank and tell them that you heard about us first at I Am Northwest Arkansas. Signature Bank of Arkansas is a member of the FDIC and an equal housing lender.
Hey, it's Randy Wilburn from I Am Northwest Arkansas. We all know that access to safe and secure housing is crucial for thriving communities. That's why the Northwest Arkansas Council created Groundwork, a program dedicated to addressing the region's workforce housing needs. Whether you're a developer, policymaker, or just someone who cares about housing affordability, become an active participant in shaping Northwest Arkansas's future. Learn more and get involved in the pursuit of innovative housing solutions across NWA at groundworknwa.org. That's groundworknwa.org. Groundwork, building the foundation for a better Northwest Arkansas.
It's time for another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas, the podcast covering the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in general here in the Ozarks. Whether you are considering a move to this area or trying to learn more about the place you call home, we've got something special for you. Here's our host, Randy Wilburn.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm here with you. I've got a great episode for you today, and you probably heard the opening where I talked about us doing a series on those that have either relocated or transplanted to Northwest Arkansas. And we've been wanting to, for a while, to tell multiple individual stories here in Northwest Arkansas about how they ended up here. And my next guest is certainly no stranger to that experience. And that individual is Dr. Jeff Flanigan. He is the principal of George Junior High School in Springdale. We connected. We actually have several mutual friends, and I was referred to him by my man Anthony from Music Moves AR or Music Moves Arkansas. And Anthony Ball has got a lot of contacts here in Northwest Arkansas. And so he introduced me to Dr. Jeff Flanigan, and I'm really thankful for that introduction. But I wanted to really, without further ado, just welcome Dr. Jeff to the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Well, and I'm also excited to be recording here in the Furman Garner Performance Studio at KUAF. I always love to give them a shout out whenever I can. And certainly public radio is a very important piece for me, something that I grew up with, but more importantly, just a place to really get some amazing news and information. And of course, for those of you that are regular listeners, you know that our podcast is also featured on the Ozarks at Large show, which comes on Monday through Friday, both at 12 noon and at 7 p.m. So with all of that aside, I certainly want to welcome you, Dr. Jeff, to the podcast to just kind of share your experience. And I'd love for you just to give your superhero origin story about coming back here, because you were actually here before.
Yeah.
And in our previous conversations, you kind of gave me a breakdown of how you ended up back in Northwest Arkansas. But I'd love for you to share that story with the audience.
Yeah. So I'm from Magnolia, Arkansas, Southwest Arkansas, and graduated 1995. The only school that I applied to was Morehouse. My whole life, my mother was like, "You're going to go to Morehouse." Matter of fact, my mother She wanted me to be a doctor, an Omega, and go to Morehouse. And she got 1 out of 3. I got the doctorate, but as things would have it, some situations I wasn't feeling like the goalposts kept getting moved at Morehouse relative to my full scholarship.
Sure.
Which is what I had.
Right.
I still have the letter somewhere, full, everything. And to me, full means full.
Full, yeah.
And the goalposts kept getting changed. Oh, we got a new president. Need you to have a higher ACT, 1 point higher, because you're not a legacy. So you need to be 1 point higher. So I had like a 26. I'd only taken it, one time or whatever.
Right.
Okay, cool. So I go back and I do that. And it just like the goalposts just kept changing. And finally, summer, like immediately after I graduated high school, I went on a senior trip. And when I came back from the senior trip, my mother was like, hey, they said we got to send a $3,500 non-refundable fee by July 5th for whatever. I said, wait a minute. That's not the definition of full. And I was fed up by this point. And so I remember calling my high school counselor, Miss Whitney Whitelaw. I called her after 11 p.m. and she was asleep. This was back when they had phone books.
Yeah.
Look in the phone book.
Right.
And I called her. And that's just so absurd to think now if a student called me at 11 something and it was not a real emergency, life or death.
Yeah.
But I did. I called her after 11 p.m. and she was asleep and she answered the phone all groggy. And I was like, hey, I need to talk to you in the morning. She was like, I'll meet you in the morning. I was sitting outside her door at 7 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah.
And the University of Arkansas had, been obviously corresponding with me. I'd been up here for a couple, back then they called them multicultural weekends and things of that nature. And I'd always said if I stayed in the state of Arkansas, I would go to Arkansas. So she had a friend in admissions at the time. I don't know who that person was, but whatever they did, they backdated my application. And I also applied to the Honors College at UCA just in case or whatever. And Arkansas came back. And so August of 1995, August 19th, I believe it was actually the day, 1995, I moved in Yoakum Hall. And so was undergrad 4 years and then got a master's. So from 95 to 2000, I was here.
What was it like coming here to this side of the state? What had you been to? I think you had mentioned maybe you had been to Fayetteville before.
Yeah, like I said, they had this thing called, there were multicultural weekends. They used to send buses in the hubs. So my hub from Magnolia was Arkadelphia.
Okay.
So you get to Arkadelphia and then you get on this charter bus and they bring you up here. And you spend a couple of days and tour the campus and, they would have like a couple organizations step. I remember my junior year, which was 94, we did one and the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta stepped in the union. And in that group of young ladies who were stepping, 4 of them would eventually become homecoming queen.
Okay.
Because the university was in a run where there were 5 consecutive African-American homecoming queens.
Okay.
And I was like, whoa, I didn't even realize, that was a thing, right? And so, yeah, I'd been here. And Northwest Arkansas was and still is detached seemingly from the rest of the state.
Yeah.
So it feels like an entirely different state like West Virginia and Virginia. And so that's kind of how it was. So, yeah, I knew, what it looked like per se, but,
that was the extent of it. And
that was it.
And then the Northeast and the east side of the state is much different than. That's an understatement.
It's different.
And so, okay, so you came here, you went to school, you got your master's degree, then you left.
Yeah.
And where did you go?
So I wanted to be a college basketball coach.
Okay.
That was my thing, which again was not the doctor that my mother was hoping and dreaming I'd become.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that. So my first job, I was the first full-time assistant women's basketball coach at Southern Arkansas University.
Okay.
My hometown of Magnolia. Coach Sam Biley was the head women's coach. I was coaching his son, Brian, in AAU my senior year in high school. And he pulled me to the side the summer before I left and was like, hey, you want to be a college coach? I was like, yes, sir. And he said, well, I just became the head women's basketball coach. He had been the men's assistant at SAU for 15 years.
Okay.
And so he was like, look, if you promise to come back, I'll wait. They told me I could have a full-time assistant for the first time, but if you say you'll come home, I'll wait. And the only question I asked him was, are the rules different? And he said, nope. I said, cool. So I had a goal knowing that there was something waiting on me. And so he calls me my junior year, second semester, and says, hey, how quickly could you get a master's degree? I said, I don't know. He said, find out and call me right back. So I called my mentor, my advisor, Janet Forbes in the physical education department, and she told me about the Master of Arts in Teaching program, that if I graduated in May of 99, I could immediately start in graduate school that summer, and then a whole year I could be finished May of 2000 with a master's.
Okay.
And so I told Coach Biley, said, good. They had just made a rule, the outgoing athletic director, which I later found out was directly tied to preventing Coach Biley from hiring me, another person of color. This is a true story.
Yeah.
He put this rule out that, number one, new coaches at Southern Arkansas University had to have a master's degree to be able to coach and teach in the physical education department.
Sure.
And he told Coach Biley that he had until the beginning of the 2000-2001 season to use the money allotted to hire the full-time assistant or it would go away.
Right.
So basically put me on the clock. And so we did it. So you go on senior walk at the University of Arkansas, the year 2000, you will see my name twice. You see William Jeffrey Flanigan for the bachelor's, and then right under it says William Jeffrey Flanigan, MAT, Masters of Arts in Teaching, because I had 1 hour left on my bachelor's in May of 99. So I walked in graduation and everything, but I had 1 hour. I took a camping class in the summer. So I was provisionally admitted to graduate school because if I fail a camping class,
sure.
Right. The 1 hour camping class. But anyway, so technically the way they did it, I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in the same year.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So it seems like you've experienced a lot of goalposts moving, which is an understatement. And that's really not what this particular podcast episode is about. But that's a conversation I'd love to follow up with you with. So then you spend some time coaching, I'm assuming teaching too?
No, not in that regard. Rest in peace to Coach Jay Adcox. Jay Adcox took over as the athletic director in 1999 at Southern Arkansas University. Coach Jay Adcox had known me since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
He was a former football coach at SAU, and his son Joey is a year older than me. So he'd seen me grow up. Coach Adcox played football with a man by the name of Sylvester Ritter. You may not know that name, but you know him as the Junkyard Dog. And I grew up as just a big wrestling fan. And the Junkyard Dog was the most popular black wrestler in the 80s. And he played football with Coach Adcox. So Coach Adcox was instrumental in getting wrestling shows to Magnolia and specifically SAU. So when Junkyard Dog and Mid-South Championship Wrestling would come, Coach Adcox would always let me move up to sit by him in the front row. I'm a kid.
Yeah.
And he never forgot that. So when Coach Biley let him know who he was holding the job for, Coach Adcox, he made sure that it happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the knowledge and stuff that I have is not me being this, paranoid black dude that sees racism around every corner. This is me getting the information directly from someone in the room for these conversations.
Yeah.
And so what Coach Adcox said was, look, if I let you teach in the physical education department, anybody can do that. People need to see who you really are. So he worked the deal where to get a full-time assistant, there had to be another part of the job to pay. It's Division II, right?
Yeah.
So he made me the director of student activities. And I had a whole other office in the student union in the Reynolds Center, flat in the middle of the campus. And it allowed me to interact with people on a much different level outside of athletics.
Yeah.
And he said, people need to hear you speak. They need to see you in this regard, which then opened me up to the president of the college, Dr. Gamble, offered me the opportunity to teach freshman seminar. So I ended up teaching anyway.
Yeah.
And
it sounds like it gives new meaning to this expression that I use quite a bit, where I always try to tell young people specifically is that your gift will make room for you.
1,000,000%.
And you know what I'm saying? And so it certainly is. It's when you hear stories like that, you're not surprised. And I've heard it from other people, but I mean, just kind of hearing you relay your story and your experience growing up and then also what you experienced at SAU, certainly your gift does make room for you. But I mean, that's for anybody listening to this. You should know that if you're good at something and maybe you felt like you've been held back in any way, shape, or form, trust me, people are always watching.
Always.
And you never know when somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, next person up. You're that person.
Jay Adcox. There's so much. There's a podcast just for this element of my life.
Yeah.
Because there are pieces to this story that predate my birth.
Yeah.
That the previous athletic director, who was the previous basketball coach, had a real vendetta against my family. My mentor, who's also my very, very close relative, he's like my uncle, but he is technically my first cousin. Our fathers were brothers. Coach Al Flanigan, who is a Hall of Fame basketball coach, who I consider the greatest basketball coach in the state of Arkansas history ever. He was at Little Rock Parkview. Has been a part of 12, 13 state championships, but he's from Magnolia and was one of the first black players at Southern Arkansas University. And he played for W.T. Watson, who was the previous athletic director. And
so there was some history there.
A lot of history. And W.T. needed Al, but Al, if you research Al Flanigan, he's a man, and he's a man's man, and he was a man's man in the 60s when he was playing, and he was not taking the types of things that W.T. Watson was giving.
Yeah.
And W.T. needed Al because he was amazing. He was an All-American.
Yeah.
He's still in the top 5, I believe, in SAU in scoring, and he hadn't played since 1971.
Right.
So that's pre-3-point line and all of that.
Yeah.
So he's a Hall of Famer there as well. And so when it wasn't just the fact that I was a person of color that Coach Biley, and I got to give a big shout out to Coach Biley, because it would have been much easier for him to just hire someone else.
Right.
But he's a man of his word, and he promised me that as an 18-year-old. 18. Like, I just need you to understand the God in this situation is that this man offered me a job at 18 that he had to wait, for 5 years for me to come into.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
which is kind of unheard of nowadays. I mean, when you think about
it ain't even kind of.
It's not.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
But
it is.
like you said, God.
Right.
So, but I spent 2 years at SAU, which was dope because my great grandmother was in her last 2 years of life. She died at 97.
Wow.
97 years old in 2003. So I got to spend, she got to see me coach college basketball, and, I got to see her and spend that time. And I know that was God.
Yeah.
Then I went to UALR for 2 years and got to work with another Hall of Fame coach, and Coach Joe Foley, who is still there, and just had an amazing time at UALR. Coach Foley is still a friend and a confidant, and then realized that, being a father was more important than the trajectory of my career, which was moving super fast.
Sure.
At this time. And
it's a lot of time required.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the time required.
I was 22-hour work days as a college basketball coach aren't unfamiliar. But, I buried my father when I was 10 years old, and I had twin sons who weren't 2. And being able to be their father and be present for them was far more important than my goals and aspirations of being a Division I head basketball coach.
Yeah. Wow.
So
how did you end up back here in Northwest Arkansas?
Yeah. So leave UALR to go to Little Rock School District with the plan of going to be Al Flanigan's assistant at Parkview, and then eventually pass the baton, and, he ride off in the sunset, and I keep the name going. When you go to Little Rock Parkview now, you turn on to Flanigan Lane.
Okay.
That's the legacy that Coach Flanigan has established. And my cousin Wes Flanigan is the associate head coach at Ole Miss. And my cousin Alan, his son, plays at Ole Miss. And then my cousin Jason, Coach Flanigan's second oldest son, is the head men's coach at Hines Junior College in Mississippi. So we're a basketball family. It's the family business. So then got an opportunity, got a call out of the blue after 4 years at Parkview and Little Rock and Henderson Junior High to take over head basketball coach at Ashdown, Arkansas. And I was 31 at the time. Didn't want to leave. You know, had twin boys who were there in Little Rock and didn't want to leave. And talked to Coach Flanigan. He was like, man, look how long it took me to become a head coach. And they're offering you this opportunity at 31 years old. So I can't stand in the way of that. So I moved to Ashdown, kicking and screaming. Turned that job down 3 times. Shout out to Coach Chris Hill, still a great friend of mine. He still takes credit for me marrying my wife, and he brought me to Ashdown, and I turned him down 3 times. Shout out to David Gunn. Coach Gunn had recommended me. At the time, he was the running backs coach at Arkansas State, and he had seen my trajectory coming up and become a good confidant. Still is. Great man of God. So I go to Ashdown. And I'm the head basketball coach at Ashdown High School, and meet my wife. She was a counselor at Ashdown Junior High at the time. We get married in 2010. 2 years later, I get a call. The head basketball job is open at Blytheville. Coach David Hickson was retiring to just be athletic director. He'd been there 30-something years. And all of this, meanwhile, is going on simultaneous to my music career, simultaneous to becoming a pastor, and all of these things are happening simultaneously. Moved to Blytheville in 2012 and the head basketball coach there for 2 years, and then get a call about interviewing for the STEM Academy principal job at Jonesboro High School. Mm-hmm. Go over there 2014, get that job. They also hired my wife to be a school improvement specialist at one of the elementary schools. Like 2-3 months into that, she becomes the assistant principal at her school. So we were there for 7 years.
Wow.
Well, to get back to how this leads to me coming back to Northwest Arkansas, 2008, 2009, start the specialist program at Harding. Mm-hmm. Meet, among others, Jared Cleveland. I think Dr. Cleveland may have been like at Danville or something at that time. He wasn't Dr. Cleveland either. He was, then went to Lavaca as superintendent. We took some classes together. They were in a cohort ahead of me, but we became cool, took a liking to me. So he was trying to bring me to Lavaca. No. Like, hard no. Never even thought about it. So he told me where Lavaca was, I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, and he kept on. So over the years, every time we would see each other, he would say something. You know, then I moved into administration and we would see each other every summer at AAEA, which is a conference all administrators go to right before we go back to school. And he moved to Springdale and he was still. 2021, some things occurred where one of my teachers in Jonesboro was moving to Northwest Arkansas, and I had reached out to my mentor, who I call Dad, Dr. John L. Colbert. There was an AP science job, chemistry job at Fayetteville High School, and my teacher was an AP chemistry teacher. So he gets that job. Well, he has a wife that's also a teacher. She had applied in two districts, but 2 different schools in Springdale district. So the husband says, hey, Dr. Flanigan, I know you helped me with the Fayetteville, but do you happen to know somebody in Springdale? Yeah, I do. Know the superintendent there too. He's like, get out of here. I'm like, yeah, I do. I called Dr. Cleveland to advocate for my teacher's wife, which then set us back to talking. And again, the God element of my life is what it is. And you just know.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't looking for a job at all. I was literally trying to help someone else relocate. It never crossed my mind. You know, I never wanted a working relationship with Dr. Colbert because of our personal relationship.
Yeah.
So we never in all the years had a conversation about me coming to Northwest Arkansas. It just made sense. It was, I could tell. You know the voice of God. I'm sorry if that being too.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So you come here in 21.
21.
In the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So you picked the best time to move to Northwest Arkansas.
Man, that's, okay.
So what would you say about Northwest Arkansas that was different this time around versus when you were here for school? because you were here for school and then you left in 2000, just about, after you finished your master's.
Yeah.
And then you were gone for almost, I'm
over
sure
20 years.
Yeah, over 20 years.
Yeah,
I'm sure you at some point came up for a football game or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I came back. I'm an Alpha, proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So I came back multiple occasions for the fraternity and different things, and few football games over the years, Black alumni reunions, things of that nature. Never coming back with an eye
To come back.
Yeah. It was never, even though as I was seeing. Now, what I will say, I have a line brother, Philip Cummings, who I kind of give him credit for our generation of people who started to come and stay. Like, I vividly remember us having conversations in Bruff Cafeteria about, man, I can't wait till we leave. We be packed up. And
Ready
that's
to
literally
go.
what happened.
Yeah.
Graduation, my stuff was packed. Took a few pictures and I was out. Never to return in my mind, right? So I think the thing that really got me in having conversations with Dr. Cleveland was, and I'm being 100% transparent, when I got to Northwest Arkansas in 95, we were told, Springdale was a sundown town. Right? You don't go over there by yourself and don't get caught over there after dark. That was like those, I call them OG conversations.
Sure.
They're passing that game down, just trying to keep, and that was so beautiful. There were people like Dr. Lonnie Williams, who's also like my father, that took care of me. Rest in peace, Dr. Nola Hort Royster, who she was one of those. Dr. Michael McFrazier, Dr. Jaquita Hamer, Dr. Erica Holliday, T.C. Carter, Dr. Charlene Johnson, who was my all-time favorite professor, Dr. Gary Morgan, taught Black Ghetto, these pioneers and these people who saw us, it was like 3%, 3.5% maybe at that time in the mid-90s, African American. And so we knew each other and we were our own colony.
Yeah.
But a lot of us weren't talking about staying, right? It was a means to an end. So in the conversation with Dr. Cleveland about Springdale, of all things, he let me know that the district was a majority minority district. It's like, wait a minute, what? I hadn't even thought about it like that. There was no reason to. My relationship with him is what opened the door to have conversations. I hadn't even looked at the demographics. And so when I started looking at the demographics, I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is different. And it felt different. And the God part of it is what I will continue to say. I knew it. It just made, like, I know what God's voice sounds like, And so Jeff would have never made the decision. Like, wasn't on the radar.
Yeah. And now you're here. And now you're here.
Happily.
What do you think about this area now? Obviously, like you said, it's grown. And it's funny that you mentioned the whole history of Springdale. Rogers was also, I think, a sundown town. For those of you, the uninitiated, what that simply means is that if you were Black, you were basically told in no uncertain terms not to be caught out in certain cities in Northwest Arkansas when the sun went down. And that was like that in other parts of the South and even in the North, there's some places that are like that. And so maybe if you see if you want to get an understanding of this, and though this might be kind of a departure of that storytelling about sundown towns, but if you see Lovecraft Country on HBO, it really gives you a good understanding of what sundown towns are. Yeah. And I only bring it up is because I've actually interviewed some old school African-American football players that came here to the U of A, and they were told in no uncertain, this was back in the 80s, they were told in no uncertain terms where they could go and where they couldn't go. Yeah. And where you need to make sure you were back on campus by a certain time. And that's just the way that it is.
I would tell you, my grandmother, who was a retired teacher, she taught for 40 years. She's 98 years young.
Wow.
She's super vibrant, super active. She's, for the last 17 years, played on a traveling beanbag baseball team at her center, her rec center there in Little Rock.
Oh, you got to love that.
Oh, man, she's dope, and she's my North Star. But my grandmother, when I told her I was going to come back to Northwest Arkansas, she said, what? And she said, all of those years that I prayed for you to get out of there safely, and you choosing to go back? And I had to explain to her the changes.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Because, Silas Hunt Hall, which is the administration building on campus, is named after Silas Hunt, who was the first Black admitted to graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Silas Hunt and my grandmother were friends.
Really?
They worked on the newspaper together at Arkansas A&M, which is now UAPB. And my grandmother had the ability to take some classes, graduate courses, but could not get a degree conferred, a graduate degree conferred. So one of the only few times I had ever seen my grandmother tear up was seeing her only grandson receive a scholarship to the University of Arkansas.
Yeah.
You know, so I had to, kind of break down, and she's, again, my North Star. You know, if you wanted to hang out with my grandmother growing up, there was only two places to do that. And that was at school and at church. So my becoming an educator and a pastor are directly tied to my connection to my grandmother.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So I had to explain to her, first the God part of it, because she can't argue that.
That's the easy part.
That's easy.
That's the easy conversation.
And she knows.
Yeah.
Right. So this woman is the strongest woman I know. My mother passed September 13th of 23. And my grandmother and my mother lived together for the last 17 years.
Yeah.
She's the second of my grandmother's 3 children that she's had to bury. And I've never seen her one moment bitter, angry, or upset, or question even. And if those things are happening, they're happening in her head, because she's not exhibiting that.
Yeah.
So when I say and confirm to her, matter of factly, that I know this is where God is sending me, then she's okay at that point.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean now I don't have to walk her through that the place that she's thinking about in her mind is an entirely different place now.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, that was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. What was your biggest aha moment about Northwest Arkansas and how much it has changed in a 20-year period, which really is a generation? Right.
That's a dope question that we have not studied and shared. I want the people to know I don't know what he's going to ask. It is what it is. We're rolling. That is a dope question because I have a direct answer. 1994, the summer of 94, I met a young lady named Shalessa Jones at Governor School on the campus of Hendrix College in Conway. And it was the first time I'd ever heard the name Springdale. She was a student at Springdale High School. Her father was Dr. Eddie Jones, the late Dr. Eddie Jones, who was over the Inspirational Singers at the University of Arkansas and also the music director at Christian Life Cathedral. She was the only Black in her class.
Mm-hmm.
That was 1994. We graduated in 1995. So then fast forward, and I'm honestly still kind of, I don't know. I know God, but I'm like, whoa. And the whole summer, I'm like, just give me a sign. First day of school, kids start walking in my building and their mouths started dropping. This is the first day of school, August 2021. And they were just stopping. And they were like, "You our principal?" Yeah. And it was just like constant. And I texted Dr. Cleveland. I said, "I got it. You're right."
Yeah.
Because I realized in that moment, I'm not Marshallese. I'm not Hispanic, but I'm not white. And for the first time, for many of my students, it was the first time they seen anybody in any modicum of control that looked something like them.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it. And that's what my biggest concern had nothing to do with Northwest Arkansas as a region. The diversity has grown in such a way, and I don't worry about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? Even if I'm going in the middle of the fire, as long as I'm going with God, it's like the 3 Hebrew boys.
Right.
Right. I'm cool with it. I'm straight. But I wasn't worried about that part. I was worried about my relativity, my relatability, and connecting with my students. I knew at every other stop what I meant to the Black community. And to this day, the connections I still have with former athletes and students over the years, whether it be at Jonesboro or Blythe or Ashdown or Little Rock and the stops that I made.
Sure.
That population, I can name all of my Black students at George off the top of my head,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I was worried about would I translate, for lack of a better term, no pun intended.
Yeah.
And I realized in that first 30, 45 minutes when we opened the doors that first day. And that's been an amazing thing. That's been the aha moment.
Yeah. Do you think it, because I heard some similar context in a conversation that I had with my wife and a few other people that were remarking about the new principal at Ramey Junior High.
My frat brother.
Yeah,
Chris Johnson.
Which I
Dr.
understand.
Chris Johnson.
Dr. Chris Johnson.
Shout out to Chris. I've known Chris a long time.
Which I understand has been a monumental take and find for them at Ramey. And he is a kind of a no-nonsense kind of administrator. I think that's putting it politely,
no
right?
doubt.
And
that works.
And from what I've heard, even anecdotally from some of my son's friends, is that he doesn't play any games, but he lets you know that it's important. And I guess this conversation is kind of going in a different direction that I want to. I guess I'm going to just bring up because this is my podcast, so I can pretty much do whatever I want to do with it. And so I want to kind of just back up a second, because one of the things that I think was probably monumental for a lot of those kids that saw you for the first time in 2021 was just the lack of males in public education, period, let alone a black male, right? Sure. So then you've got that, and it's like, oh, okay. Because I can remember the difference that my dad made. I grew up in a place called Teaneck, New Jersey, which is right outside of New York City. It's in a county called Bergen County, a fairly affluent town, very somewhat diversified, but just not a lot. Like, there were some women black teachers. My mom was one of them, but there were very few male black teachers.
Sure.
And my dad really played a role in that. And I can understand the power that has on a young child when they don't see anyone that looks like them. And it's like, well, they're just kind of going through the motions, and there's really no back and forth. And again, I can't blame. I mean, all I can say is that, this is the time has finally come. And as Northwest Arkansas continues to grow, my hope would be is that there would be more experiences like that for the population here. But we still have a ways to go. I'm under no illusions about that.
So I also would be remiss without kind of mentioning, this is back to the intentionality of God. My father, Ellis Flanigan, was born in 1919. He was the first black police officer in Magnolia in 1965. So that's my father. All right. So he was 57 when I was born. So this is my father. So let me make this connection. My parents and my grandmother bought homes in this new subdivision in Magnolia called the Hilldale subdivision. And it was the first brick house subdivision for blacks, like in Magnolia, right? So my parents bought a home that was built, original owners, that if I jumped the back fence of my parents' house and then jumped one more fence, I was in my grandmother's backyard, right? Next door to my grandmother was my mother's high school science teacher and my grandmother's boss, who was the principal of the Magnolia Junior High School, the first black administrator in the Magnolia School District, Mr. Jerry Jones. The year after I was born, my mother helped facilitate the adoption of their only child, JJ, who is to this minute my oldest and closest friend, who also came to the University of Arkansas the year after me in 1996, played for the Razorbacks football, played in the NFL, right? His father was our junior high principal. Across the street from my grandmother and Mr. Jones was Mr. and Mrs. Ernest Henderson, schoolmates of my grandmother's at Arkansas A&M, also members of the same church, Trinity Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Mr. Henderson was a former coach and science teacher. Mrs. Henderson was a counselor. Next door to the Hendersons was Mr. and Mrs. Gatlin. Mrs. Gatlin taught French and Spanish at Magnolia High School, also taught my mother in high school, and her sister was a classmate of my mother's. Mr. Gatlin was an administrator over the trio programs like Upward Bound at Southern Arkansas University and also a music man. Down the street next door to the Gatlins,
I begin to see a theme here,
was Miss Evelyn Tucker, my first grade teacher. Her mother was my first babysitter. Around the corner was Mrs. Darlene Montgomery, who was my all-time favorite teacher ever, who saved my life because when I was able to move back to Magnolia after my mother had remarried in 85, then my father died in 87. And so I wanted to come back home from St. Louis to Magnolia with my grandmother. Ms. Montgomery is my 6th grade teacher, and that woman saved my life. She lived around the corner. You see where I'm going?
Mm-hmm.
So all of the people that I needed to be able to see who I could be, they were right there. I didn't even understand the novelty of it. I just imagined that this is how everybody's life was, right? My kindergarten teacher, Miss Elizabeth Buffington, was also my Sunday school teacher at school. She had also taught my mother, when my mother was in school. My mother, K through 12, never went a day of school without my grandmother in the building. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I thought this was normal.
Yeah.
It was absolutely not.
Not normal. No,
right? So then when I get to the University of Arkansas and I meet Dr. John L. Colbert, Dr. Lonnie Ray Williams, right? Dr. Gordon Morgan, I start to see people that look like me, but I'd already seen Elihu Gaylord, Reverend Elihu Gaylord back in Magnolia. I told you, John Gatlin, all of these people I got to see, Mr. Charles Peters, Mr. David Fielding, who is the father of my dear friend Saranto, who was a state representative. And this brother was just, and still to this day, one of the most positive dudes. But this man is just a regular dude and decided, I can do more. So I'm going to go out here and run, for office and become a state congressman, a state representative. These were people I knew, right? I did not understand how blessed I was until I got out. And those things grounded me in who I am, but also gave me a blueprint of what I could be.
Yeah. So, in saying all that, the biggest challenge is most of the kids that you are in charge of don't have that kind of experience.
They don't, but they have me.
Yes.
Right. And so now we've intentionally gone after educators of color, right, to bring in. The empirical data in education for years has said gaps are closed at a faster rate and achievement soars when students can see themselves in their teachers and their administrators.
Yeah.
So I am on the lookout constantly for teachers of color, whether that be Hispanic, Black, or Marshallese, because that's what the makeup of my students are. So here's the thing, and I didn't realize, but this is what was going on with me in my life. Mr. Jones, who was like my father, when my father was being let down into the ground, Mr. Jones stood right there with me next to the grave. And he put his arm around me. He didn't say a word. He put his arm around me. And when my father was laid in his final resting place, he took me, brought me back to his vehicle, told my grandmother, my mother, hey, we taking Jeff with us. And he took JJ and I to Pine Bluff, to his sister Verse's house. Aunt Verse cooked some chicken. I'll never forget it. And I could see in my mind's eye now, I can look back and see Mr. and Mrs. Jones letting everybody know, hey, Jeff just buried his father. Now, they all knew me because JJ and I are best friends. We grew up next door to each other, right? So I've been there many a times. But that their family in that moment became my family. Quick story. And I'm going to do this without getting emotional. I was in geometry in the 9th grade. Miss Norris, I'll never forget this. And Miss Norris gave a project. It was a 300-point project. And you had to build something with your father because we weren't going to be in school in Father's Day. So we had done some kind of project with geometry about our moms, and she wanted to give the fathers a shout out. 300 points. My 9th grade year, which means all of these grades count on my transcript. This is high school. I was going to take a 0. Straight A student, I'm going to take a 0. I don't have a father. And Miss Norris was a great teacher. She just wasn't thinking. I talk to my teachers now, and every year since being an administrator, I talk to them about thinking about the things that they say and the questions they ask and getting to know the students that they're in front of. Right?
Yeah.
Like, don't come asking kids about, where you going for spring break, what you going to do. Because I have many kids that they don't look forward to breaks.
Right.
Because school is their only source of stability. It's the place they know they're going to get meals. They know they're going to be loved, right? And that's just the reality of what we do. So she wasn't thinking like that. I'm going to take a 0. Project was due on Monday. Sunday morning, my grandmother and I, Sunday afternoon, we're coming back from church. And as we're about to pull into the driveway, carport. Mr. Jones is in the carport at our house. He's got all his wood and tools and stuff and paint. And he puts his hand up, tells my grandmother to stop. And I'm like, what the world? So we get out and Mr. Jones said, hey, Miss Hendricks, Jeff and I got a project to build and work on. And he looked at me and he just winked. I hadn't said anything, Mr. Jones. I hadn't said anything to my grandmother. I hadn't said anything to anybody. To this day, I do not know. I do not know. We built a bookcase and he got a jigsaw out and we cut half circles around the bottom where it stood. And so we had the right angles and we did these little triangle shapes and to hold. It was dope. And I loved the Oakland A's baseball team at the time. And so we painted it green and then had yellow paint and put A's and he let it sit under the carport and dry. And that next day, and I rode to school every day with Mr. Jones, every day from 6th grade through the 9th grade. So I rode to school with my principal and we put that bookcase in the back of the truck. And I will never forget the pride I felt walking through with him carrying that bookcase to Miss Norris's room, got 300 points. I got it. And I think about that to this day because that marked me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a father. That's Mr. Jones.
Oh, wow.
Every Father's Day, I call Mr. Jones. I tell him thank you for choosing my best friend.
Yeah.
Because when he chose my best friend, he chose me. And that was an intentional decision to have us grow up together, right?
Yeah.
My mother had 5 miscarriages before she had me. And they were older. So it was an intentional decision. And our lives have been in lockstep. We talk every day.
Yeah.
I have twin boys, Jaden and Jordan. He has twin boys, Jai and Jalen. Our youngest children are 18 days apart. It's an amazing thing. But God will always place what you need and who you need when you need them.
Yeah.
So now what I'm saying is my students, whatever their circumstances are, they don't have an excuse anymore because we take that away. So yeah, maybe you didn't have it in the home. Well, I didn't necessarily either, right? So now we can give you an opportunity, and that's part of our mission and vision.
Man, listen, you gave me an education today, that's for sure. I mean, these are some amazing stories. And I always tell people, we are the sum total of the stories that we've experienced and gone through.
No doubt.
And they either make us or break us, one or the other. There's usually very little room for anything in between. And certainly what you have experienced, Dr. Jeff, has made you and continues to make you, because I don't believe any of us are finished products.
No.
I
hope not.
Yeah, I hope not either.
Not.
Yeah, so because as soon as I hear that, well done, I'm like, okay, I don't want to hear that right now. I still got work to do.
No.
Just like you got work to do. But no, I mean, within the context and the framework of, what Northwest Arkansas represents, for some people, it's a new place, new opportunities, new beginnings. And it sounds like what you have experienced, both at the administrative level and just as a man, has afforded you an opportunity to basically pay some things forward that you got and that you experienced growing up that made an indelible impression upon you.
Yeah, I sit in my office and my best friend and I, we laugh about it all the time. I try to get to office early every day.
Yeah.
And I'll look at my keys and I'll sit there and start laughing. I was like, man, I turned into Mr. Jones. And every time I see him, we talk about that. He just laughs and he has the most infectious laugh. But it's that laugh when every time he sees me, he hugs me and he always tells me that, he doesn't look at me any differently than he looks at my best friend. And I know that's real.
Yeah.
Because he lived that, like he showed that.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
I'm over the moon about it, man.
Yeah, I love that. Well, hopefully you'll be able to share this episode with him.
Oh, no doubt.
He'll get a chance to hear it and maybe even some folks back in Magnolia and some other people that really made an impression and a mark on you will be able to experience this. But I appreciate you coming on and just kind of giving us a viewpoint of what it was like for you coming back to Northwest Arkansas, kind of a retransplant, if you will, because you were here for school.
Right.
And then, it's funny. I talk to a lot of people that never leave after school.
Sure.
and it black and white. So it's not, you know what I'm saying? So it's interesting. And I've talked to some that would have been maybe peers of yours or maybe a couple of years after you. So, but, you know, I think the thing that's interesting about Northwest Arkansas right now is, and I've said this over and over again, is that it really is a blank slate. It's a blank canvas, you know, for what you want it to be. And certainly I think we all can make our environment what we want to see.
I just, that is so true. And everybody has a space and a place.
Yeah.
But there are little things that happen that remind me constantly that you're exactly where you need to be.
Yeah.
So I had a young man in the office this morning. I had a meeting right before having to come here, and I had a meeting in a few minutes back in my office. And so I was kind of in between, and the kid's in the office. He said, Dr. Flanigan, I got your new album. and he said it was so funny. And all of my staff in the office they just perked up. And he was like, man, you go hard, bro. And I'm sorry, Doc. I started laughing. Nah,
it's fine.
It was funny.
Yeah.
But he came and, dapped me up and gave me the bro hug.
Yeah.
And I knew I could see it from him. It was dope for him to be like, that's my principle.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So that element of relatability and just being human, and that's what I want them to understand, that the only limits are limits they put themselves.
Sure.
Now, limits and barriers are two different things.
Right.
Right. Because see, if you start telling them this stuff about, hey, you can be anything you want to be.
Right.
Without giving them the game on the other end of that.
Yes.
That, hey, we still live in a world where people of color make less money doing the same jobs with the same experience and skill sets. Women make less money doing the same jobs with the same experience and same skill sets and education, right? They know these things. They may not be able to articulate them the way we can, but they know it. Yeah. So when you tell them they can be whatever they want to be, you got to give them the other side. You put limits. The world puts barriers. I can teach you how to overcome barriers. You put a limit out there, now you got a bigger problem.
Right.
So we're going to be, Master P, no limit. And then we're going to teach you how to go through and go over these barriers.
Yeah.
Because the barriers are what they are. That's other people's ignorance, but it's real, right? So this kid may not want to be a rapper or a principal or a pastor, but the fact that he knows somebody that's all of those things simultaneously lets him know I can do whatever I want to do.
It's possible. It's possible.
This is an option.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my kids know. You come to me and tell me, hey, Doc, I want to be a physicist. The commitment I have with every single student at George Junior High School, you come tell me you want to be somebody, I'm going to put you in front of somebody that's doing it.
Right.
Either directly, via Zoom, whatever. That's my responsibility. So you come say, hey, Doc, I want to be this. And they know it.
Yeah.
And so the thing that you realize, they got to be comfortable enough to be willing to say that stuff outside of their heads because they have dreams. But a lot of them are scared to say it out loud.
Right.
Because they can't see it.
Yeah.
So how do you know you want to be an astronaut?
And if it's not being reinforced in the home.
There you go.
Then, yeah.
And let me say this. I've never had, in my 23 years of education, never met a bad parent.
Yeah.
Met a lot of parents unequipped, unsupported. I led a lot of parents who had scar tissue and trauma from their educational and personal experiences. And all they want is the best for their babies. And they may not know the language figuratively and literally the language.
Yeah.
Because I deal with 85% of my students are English language learners, and many of that percentage go home to people that don't speak English. But they also may not speak educationalese. Or when they come in those doors at school, they're transplanted back to when they were in school and they had a bad experience. So it's our responsibility to make those people comfortable and, hey, we on the same side. And so a lot of times we have conversation with parents about what you want to be when you grow up. You start helping get those parents on the goals that they want to achieve and realize, hey, it's not too late.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for them to support their children. Because I don't expect my kids to go home to teachers.
No.
I had that, right? I went home to a grandmother. I was on the 4th grade level in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Because my grandmother was a teacher.
Yeah.
I thought this was just normal
Right.
that you read The Color Purple
It's
when
not.
you're 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Please don't let any of your 7-year-olds read The Color Purple.
No.
Let them get older before they experience Alice Walker.
Yeah.
But you feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I didn't know that was abnormal to be reading books that didn't have pictures in it at that time. That's what you did. The greatest thing my grandmother would get me every year was updates to the World Book Encyclopedias. The dude would come through and she'd get the new, updated joint.
That's called old school Google.
That's old school Google. That's Wikipedia right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
That's what it was. And I would just dive into these things.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that's not how everybody else was being raised.
Right.
So now it's my responsibility in the role that I'm in to bring that to the students that God has put in front of me.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's awesome.
Real talk.
That's awesome, man. It's so encouraging to hear your story and to hear how you share it, certainly. And I can recognize that you are certainly making a difference, even without speaking to any of your students, that you are clearly making a difference in the lives of some of these young people. And, that's what we need. We need that here in Northwest Arkansas, just like we need it in Northern California and Oakland school systems and the Atlanta school systems.
New Orleans.
You fill in the blank.
Yeah.
But I will
Anytown, USA.
Yeah, but for sure. And I will say that, Northwest Arkansas, again, is a blank canvas. And certainly you are painting a masterpiece up there in Springdale at George Junior High School. In addition to that, as you said, you're not only an administrator, an educator, you're a musician. You have an album circa 1977. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. Folks, I was blown away when I listened to it. He shared the link with me when we first talked. I listened to it. I was like, oh, my gosh, this is great. My son was like, oh, I've heard one of those songs on TikTok. And so it was really cool to be able to hear that. And again, that speaks to the point of, not let anybody put you in a box. Just, because a lot of times people say, oh, well, this is what you're going to do. And you're only going to do this for the rest of your life. And it's just like, that's not quite how it works. And if that is how it works, then life would be very boring.
You know what a Razorback Classic is? Have you heard that?
No.
So Razorback Classic is, and they still do it. They select them every year. You get like this full page in the yearbook at the University of Arkansas.
Okay.
So I was a Razorback Classic after my sophomore year. It's a big deal. They only pick 10. And you get interviewed because they got to do your full page or whatever, right? This young lady interviewed me. I'll never forget it. She had the small spiral notebook, the little note, real small that you flip over, like you see a lot of journalists and would have. And so she's interviewing me and she was like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So I'm like 19, maybe 20. And I said, I'm a Division I college basketball coach and I'm going to release a rap album. And she said,
yeah, she laughed.
Like she said, I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
I can see her. And she's writing that little notebook. And I said, and it didn't take 5 years.
Yeah.
Did not take 5 years. 4 years later, I was a Division I basketball coach and I was releasing my first album. And I dedicate that mindset to my mama.
Yeah.
Who told me at 5 years old, you're America's worst nightmare. Outspoken, educated black man. She never said boy. She was talking to a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. She was pushing me forward. She wasn't talking to that boy. She was talking to this man. And she was letting me know it's consequences. You're going to face pushback, but whatever it is if you're willing to work it, you're willing to do that, you can make it happen.
Yeah.
And so I think about those moments, right? And then what I work to do with the people that I work with, my staff, is to never do that because you might deal with a child who didn't have somebody like my mama.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, and then they shut down because now you've let them know that you don't believe they can do this. This seems far-fetched. Just because it hadn't been done doesn't mean you can't do it.
Can't do it. I know. And I mean, that's, absolutely right.
I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Dreams get deferred and killed on a regular basis. Daily. They're driving. They're what I call dream drive-bys.
No doubt. Yeah. That's dope. I will credit you if that gets in a sermon or a song or both.
Dream
drive-bys.
Exactly.
That's real.
So, it is every real. Day. It is real. So.
Every day.
Well, man, Dr. Jeff, I appreciate you taking time to join us on the podcast. This has been an enriching conversation. I'm sure those of you that are listening probably weren't sure where we were going with this conversation, but it certainly is a good place to get a good story. And I appreciate you sharing kind of your walk right? Which is really your truth and your experience. And there's so many people that will hear what you've been through and what you've dealt with and be encouraged by it and use it as an opportunity for them to think even bigger than where they are, right? Because like I'm always saying, we're not too far apart in age, but my goal is always that the next generation beyond us, that we are the floor. And they're stepping into something else, right? Because I tell my kids all the time, y'all better do more than I've done.
Tell all of us.
You don't have a choice. And there is no excuse for that. And that goes for anybody listening to this, especially as we continue to raise this fragile generation of young people that we really need to love up on and encourage on a daily basis. Because they're not getting it at TikTok. They're not getting it in Reels. They're not getting it to social media. So
last thing I want to say, shout out to my beautiful wife, Corleen Flanigan. She's assistant principal of the K Connect Alternative in Springdale and just my biggest cheerleader and supporter. We have 6 beautiful children. Our oldest daughter, Tia, just got married in September.
Congratulations.
To a beautiful brother, an alpha man as well. She teaches at Walker Elementary in Springdale, and he teaches JAG and is a football coach at Springdale High School. Our middle daughter, Emira, is civil engineering major at the University of Arkansas.
Okay.
She was the student leader of the month at the university in January. And she's just dope in herself. And twins, Jaden Jordan. Jaden is a senior sports management major at Arkansas State. Jordan plays baseball at Southern University, New Orleans. Our baby girl, Elise, is at Vanderbilt. Then we got 11-year-old Jackson. And they are the foundation of who I am and what I do. And I would be remiss without mentioning their motivation and how they motivate me. But what you just said is exactly what we tell them. If you look up at the same age we are and you're right where we are, something went wrong.
Yeah.
Because all of the things that we're doing were to put you in a better footing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? If each generation, our kids, thankfully, are blessed to not have to have started in a hole.
Yeah.
The work that my mother and my father, my grandmother and my aunts have done was so that I didn't have to start behind.
Yeah.
Right. And I was, advanced from where my mother was, who was advanced from where my grandmother was, who was advanced from where my great grandmother was. Right. My grandmother's the oldest child of 8 and the only one with a college degree.
Yeah.
The oldest female child. All of her siblings, with the exception of her closest one, had to get through senior English to graduate high school through her.
Yeah.
Right. So to understand, she was born 1925 and my great grandmother had the wherewithal to support her wanting to go get an education. Those are all intentional things. So what you just said, that's exactly what we tell our kids. So whatever you think you got to do to set the bar higher for my grandchildren, that then sets the bar higher for my great grandchildren. Right. That's what has to happen. Each one teach one, each one reach one, and we grow as we go. Yeah. So that has to be. And if that doesn't happen, we miss it.
Absolutely.
Something is missing. So
absolutely.
Thank you, brother, for this opportunity and what you're doing, man.
Appreciate
that. It's a blessing, and I appreciate you hollering at me.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, folks, that's it. Another episode of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. It was great to talk with Dr. Jeff. I'll put links to the things that we mentioned on this episode in our show notes, including a link to Circa 1977, which is his latest album. I highly recommend that you check it out. It's actually, you can listen to it with your family. It's a clean album, so you don't have to worry about that, because every album that's on Apple is not something that is, sometimes it's for mature audiences. I'll just put it that way. No anyway, but remember, our episode comes out rain or shine every Monday. If you want to check us out, you can follow us on every major podcasting platform and just listen to I Am Northwest Arkansas. We appreciate you being part of this tribe. And we look forward to bringing you another new episode next week. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you back here soon. Peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. Check us out each and every week, available anywhere that great podcasts can be found. For show notes or more information on becoming a guest, visit iamnorthwestarkansas.com. We'll see you next week on I Am Northwest Arkansas.
Attention Northwest Arkansas businesses and talent seekers. Introducing OnboardNWA.com, your hyperlocal job board crafted for our unique community. Struggling to find the perfect match for your job openings? Onboard NWA simplifies the hiring process, connecting you with the region's top talent through tailored talent matching solutions. Whether you're an employer seeking expertise or a professional looking for your next opportunity, Onboard NWA is here for you. Discover more at onboardnwa.com. And let's build the future of Northwest Arkansas together.